The Future of the Mind: The Scientific Quest to Understand, Enhance, and Empower the Mind by Michio Kaku. Um, Imagine slipping on a sleek headband, thinking about moving your left hand, and watching a robotic arm across the room just pour you a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Or imagine a tiny implant that detects a depressive episode before you even consciously feel it, and it just nudges your neural circuits back to baseline.
Right.
It sounds like pure science fiction. But our intention for this deep dive is to explore how far neuroscience and emerging technology may actually enable humanity to, understand, read, repair, enhance, or even reproduce functions of the human mind. And the central question that we really have to keep coming back to today is this: where does established scientific evidence end, and where do technological forecasts and speculation begin?
And that boundary is constantly shifting, which, I mean, it makes it so fascinating. When we talk about the brain, it's incredibly easy to blur the line between a carefully controlled laboratory demonstration happening today and a science fiction utopia or, dystopia projected for tomorrow.
Absolutely. So we need a roadmap for this journey. We're going to start by mapping the raw hardware of the brain itself, the biology, the cells, and how we actually measure the physical activity inside the skull without just, well, guessing.
Right.
From there, we'll look at how that physical wetware constructs our reality, like how we form memories and what consciousness actually is.
Yeah, and the natural bridge from understanding that biological foundation is looking at how we actually interface with it.
Right.
So we will dive into brain-computer interfaces, neurostimulation, and the real clinical realities of repairing neurological damage.
Yeah.
Which, forces us right into the ethical minefield of cognitive enhancement.
Yeah.
The big question of can we and should we upgrade the human mind?
Right, the upgrade question. And then we get to take off the training wheels and look at the speculative sci-fi frontiers. We're talking artificial intelligence, the idea of reverse engineering the brain, digital avatars, and the ultimate forecast, which is uploading your mind to a computer. Finally, we'll pull it all back down to earth and ground it in the modern regulatory, ethical, and cybersecurity realities as they stand right now in August 2026.
It's a massive landscape to cover.
Oh, yeah.
But by keeping our feet firmly planted on the biological evidence, we can see exactly where the frontier actually is without getting lost in all the hype.
Exactly. So to understand the future of the mind, we obviously have to start with the physical wetware that creates it. People always use this analogy that the brain is just complex electrical wiring, a supercomputer made of meat.
Right.
But going through Michio Kaku's work and the supporting clinical research, calling it a computer feels, it feels wrong. It feels much more like a humid, unpredictable jungle ecosystem.
I love that jungle analogy because it captures the biological messiness that the whole wiring metaphor completely ignores. I mean, the brain isn't just a sterile society of neurons firing electrical spikes down copper wires.
Right.
Consider glial cells. For over a century, neuroscientists largely ignored them. They thought they were just the glue, which is literally what glia means in Greek, holding the important neurons together.
So like the bubble wrap of the brain.
Yeah, exactly, just structural support. But the reality is stunningly different. Astrocytes, which are a specific type of glial cell, actually wrap themselves around the synapses where two neurons communicate.
Oh, wow.
And they listen to the chemical chatter. They sweep up stray neurotransmitters to prevent toxicity. They even release their own chemicals to strengthen or weaken that connection.
Hey, so they're actively modifying the signal.
Yes, they provide the metabolic food the neurons need to even fire. So if you only look at the electrical spikes of the neurons, you are completely blind to the vast active support infrastructure that dictates whether those spikes even matter at all.
That's incredible. And those connections between neurons, the synapses, they aren't welded in place either.
No, not at all.
We hear the term neuroplasticity thrown around everywhere now, usually, by someone trying to sell you a brain training app or something.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Making it sound like your brain is just a lump of Play-Doh. Like, oh, you want to learn Mandarin or become a chess grandmaster, you just mold it.
Yeah.
But exactly how malleable is it, really?
The Play-Doh concept is a dangerous oversimplification. I mean, plasticity is a profound biological reality. The physical architecture of your brain changes based on activity and sleep, stress, learning, but it is not unlimited.
Right.
There is a strict biological budget. Changing connections requires synthesizing new proteins, building new receptors, and burning physical energy.
So it's not like downloading a free software update. There's an actual hardware cost.
A massive hardware cost. And there is a functional trade-off. When you massively strengthen one network to master a new skill, you often destabilize existing connections.
Oh, I see.
I mean, the skull is a finite physical space. So whenever we talk about future technologies enhancing the brain to learn faster or process more, we have to ask what is being sacrificed. Anatomy and timing heavily constrain how much you can change before the whole system just breaks down, which makes me think about how these functions are actually organized in that finite space. Because, pop science articles love to show a brain scan with a glowing red dot and a headline like, "Scientists find the center for love."
Yes.
Or, "Here's the genius region of the brain." It makes it seem like the brain is just a collection of separate tools in a toolbox.
The field often jokes about that as blobology.
Blobology.
Yeah. Complex human behaviors do not live in isolated blobs.
Mm.
Functions like memory, language, or even, the feeling of dread exist in highly distributed, oscillating neural networks.
Okay.
So a specific region, like the amygdala, might be a critical node for processing threat. But it doesn't house the entire concept of fear in a vacuum. It communicates constantly with the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the brainstem.
Okay, so let's talk about how we actually see those distributed networks in action, because this leads to a massive misconception that I definitely had before this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
When I see an fMRI scan, the classic gray brain with those bright orange and blue spots lighting up, I always assumed I was looking at a literal photograph of a thought.
Right.
Like the machine is capturing the electricity of the mind in real time. But fMRI doesn't measure electricity at all, does it?
No, it doesn't. And this is the first major misconception we really need to tear down today. Functional brain imaging does not photograph thoughts.
Okay.
An fMRI machine measures something called the BOL-D signal. That's blood oxygen level dependent changes.
Okay, so how does that work? Why are we measuring blood if we want to see thoughts?
Well, when a localized network of neurons fires intensely, they consume energy.
Right.
So to replenish that energy, the vascular system rushes oxygen-rich blood to that specific area. And oxygen-rich blood has slightly different magnetic properties than oxygen-depleted blood.
Oh, and the MRI is a giant magnet.
Exactly. The giant magnet in the scanner detects that magnetic difference in the blood flow.
So it's like tracking traffic congestion on a highway to figure out where a concert is happening, rather than just taking a picture of the band playing.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. It's an indirect measure of neural activity. And here is the major limitation with that. Blood flow is incredibly slow.
Right.
A neuron fires an electrical action potential in a fraction of a millisecond.
Mm.
But the blood flow response takes several seconds to peak. So fMRI provides a beautiful high-resolution structural map of where things are happening,
Right.
but it is terribly slow at telling us when.
Wow.
It's probabilistic mapping, heavy on statistical analysis.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a real-time mind reader.
So if fMRI gives us great location but terrible timing, how do we catch the actual speed of a thought? Because a thought doesn't take 5 seconds to happen. That brings us to EEG, right? Electroencephalography, the swimming cap covered in all the wires.
Yeah, EEG represents the opposite side of that measurement trade-off. Because those electrodes are placed on the scalp, they measure the aggregate electrical fields generated by millions of neurons firing all together. And the timing there is exquisite, down to the millisecond.
But I'm guessing the location accuracy is pretty awful because it's reading through hair, skin, and a thick piece of bone.
Yes.
I always picture it like standing outside a crowded house party, trying to listen to one specific conversation through a brick wall. You can hear the bass line of the music, you know if the party is rowdy or quiet, but pinpointing exactly who is saying what is nearly impossible.
The party analogy is highly accurate. The skull acts as a massive physical barrier that blurs and distorts those high-frequency electrical signals. Which brings us to the most direct, but honestly the most extreme method of measurement, which is intracranial recordings.
Which means actually drilling a hole and putting electrodes physically inside the brain.
Yes, laying grids of sensors directly on the cortex or inserting microscopic needles directly into the brain tissue itself. This is where you get high-fidelity single neuron data. But the clinical realities here are stark. Intracranial implantation carries severe risks. I mean, you have surgical complications, infections, and the brain's own immune system eventually attacking the implant.
Oh, because it sees it as a foreign object.
Exactly. It wraps it in scar tissue, which degrades the electrical signal over time.
So we really shouldn't look at a highly successful surgically implanted sensor in a lab setting and just assume some tech company is going to sell a consumer headband next year that does the exact same thing.
Oh.
The skull is an unforgiving wall.
The physics of the skull do not care about a startup's product roadmap. Lab results from implants cannot be casually projected onto non-invasive consumer tech.
Okay, so we're reading slow blood flow, we're catching muffled electrical waves through the skull, or we're implanting sensors directly into the living tissue.
Right.
But how do those raw biological spikes actually construct the continuous, immersive movie of our lives? Like, how do we jump from electrical chemistry to consciousness?
To even begin answering that, the scientific community has to break consciousness down into a practical clinical map. You cannot treat it as one mystical glow.
Okay, so how do they map it?
We separate it into 3 distinct components: wakefulness, awareness, and the capacity to report.
Wait, wakefulness and awareness aren't the same thing?
Medically, no. Wakefulness is just physiological arousal. Your eyes are open, which is driven by the brainstem. Awareness is the subjective experience of the world and yourself, and that's driven by the cortex.
Oh.
You can be awake, but entirely unaware, as in a vegetative state.
And the capacity to report.
Think about locked-in syndrome. A patient might have full wakefulness and rich, complex awareness of everything happening in their hospital room. But damage to the motor pathways means they are completely paralyzed.
So they have zero capacity to report their awareness.
Right. To the outside observer, they might appear unconscious, but internally, the movie is playing perfectly.
But even when we are awake, aware, and walking around normally, that movie we are experiencing isn't a perfect documentary, is it? We are systematically blind to huge chunks of reality all the time.
Oh, absolutely. The brain simply cannot process the overwhelming fire hose of sensory data hitting your eyes, ears, and skin every single second.
And it would just crash.
It would crash. So it uses selective attention. It prioritizes information based on goals, novelty, or threats. This is why you can be deeply engrossed in a book and literally not hear someone say your name right next to you. The brain isn't passively recording the world. It is actively constructing a model of it through predictive correction.
Predictive correction, meaning the brain is just kind of guessing what's out there.
Well, think about it. Your brain is trapped in a dark, silent box, your skull.
Right.
All it receives are electrical signals. So it uses past experiences to predict what is causing those signals in the present. It generates a hypothesis of the world, projects it outward, and it only really pays attention to sensory data that contradicts the prediction.
Oh, wow.
So when you experience an optical illusion, you aren't seeing a glitch in your hardware. You're seeing the brain's internal prediction rules temporarily exposed.
That brings me to something that I think blows everyone's mind, which is memory. If our perception of the present is just an educated guess, what is our memory of the past? Because sci-fi loves to portray memory as a hard drive.
Right.
You just plug in a USB and you download your 10th birthday party as an MP4 file. Can we eventually decode brain signals well enough to just watch a memory on a screen?
This is our next massive misconception to correct. Reconstructing limited visual shapes or language features in a lab is absolutely not equivalent to recording a complete memory or a dream.
But why not? If we have the data, why can't we just play it back?
Because biological memory is reconstruction, not playback.
Okay.
You do not have a video file of your 10th birthday stored in a neat little folder in your hippocampus. When you recall an event, the brain pulls together fragmented traces of sights, sounds, and emotions, and it actively stitches them together in the present moment.
So it's less like playing a video and more like opening a Wikipedia page that you're forced to edit every single time you read it.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The biological mechanism for that is called reconsolidation.
Reconsolidation?
Yes. When you pull a memory out of long-term storage into your active working memory, the physical proteins holding that trace together become temporarily unstable.
Oh, wow.
So the memory becomes vulnerable to your current mood, to leading questions, to new information. When it gets stored away again, it is physically altered. Every single time you remember something, you are changing it.
That is wild.
Yeah, so the idea of extracting a pure, uncorrupted, objective memory from a human brain fundamentally violates the biology of how memory works.
That is terrifying when you apply it to, the legal system or eyewitness testimony. Every time a witness tells their story, they are slightly overwriting the original file. Let's shift from memory to how we make decisions based on those memories. The popular narrative usually reduces human motivation to one single chemical. You hear it all the time. I'm doom scrolling on social media because I need a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Is human agency really just a slave to dopamine?
The dopamine as pleasure molecule narrative is a highly commercialized myth. Dopamine does not just equal joy. Its primary role in decision-making is something called reward prediction error.
Reward prediction error. Let's break that down.
Okay, imagine you expect a $10 bonus at work. You open the envelope and you get $100.
Mm.
Your brain experiences a massive spike of dopamine.
Okay.
That spike isn't just a rush of happiness. It is a biological stamp, highlighting the exact behaviors and context that led to that unexpected windfall. It screams, whatever you just did, remember the steps so we can do it again.
I see.
It's a learning mechanism.
Mm.
Conversely, if you expected $100 and got 10, your dopamine levels crash, signaling you to change your behavior.
So it's updating the predictive model of the world we talked about earlier.
Exactly that. Emotions and decisions aren't localized to one chemical. They are coordinated states across the entire network, involving bodily regulation, threat appraisal, and action preparation.
Right.
And these decisions are profoundly altered by context, especially stress.
Because acute stress, like, say, a lion jumping out of the bushes, makes you prioritize rapid action,
Yeah.
fight or flight.
But chronic stress, like poverty, a relentless workload, or housing insecurity, does something much more insidious. Chronic cortisol exposure physically changes the architecture of the prefrontal cortex.
Which handles a long-term planning.
And it changes the amygdala, which handles threat detection.
Mhm.
It shifts the brain into a state of habitual reactive decision-making.
Mm.
So you cannot talk about technologically enhancing a human mind without addressing the social and environmental context that is actively shaping that mind.
Okay, if memory is an ever-changing Wikipedia page, and decisions are these incredibly complex whole brain states influenced by stress, how in the world are we managing to translate those biological signals into computer commands? Because we've all seen the videos. A patient who is completely paralyzed imagines moving their arm, and a robotic limb across the room hands them a drink. The immediate leap the public makes is, oh, telepathy is real. The machine is reading their mind.
Which brings us to our second major misconception. Neural decoding is constrained probabilistic inference. It is not unrestricted mind reading.
What is the actual difference between those two things in practice?
Well, let's walk through what a brain-computer interface, or BCI, actually does.
Oh.
First is signal acquisition. Let's say a tiny array of electrodes implanted in the motor cortex.
Oh.
It records thousands of electrical spikes. Then the computer performs feature extraction. It looks for statistical patterns in that chaotic noise.
It's trying to find the signal in all the static.
Right. And then comes the crucial part, which is closed-loop learning. The patient might be instructed to imagine swinging a golf club.
Okay.
The algorithm looks at the neural firing pattern during that thought and associates it with moving a cursor to the LUTs on a screen. But the machine rarely gets it perfect on the first try.
Right. It's just guessing.
Yeah, so the human watches the cursor, misses the target, adjusts their own internal mental strategy, and tries again. The machine updates its algorithm, and the human updates their neural firing. It is an intensive, exhausting calibration process.
So the machine isn't literally understanding the thought, move cursor left. The user and the machine have just agreed that the neural pattern for swinging a golf club now means left.
It is a coupled human-machine system creating a highly constrained vocabulary. It only works in that specific room with that specific patient after hours of training. It is not a magic hat you can drop on someone's head to instantly know their deepest secrets.
But the vocabulary is getting more complex. There's been incredible work restoring overt speech for patients who are paralyzed. They try to speak, and the BCI translates those motor signals into text on a screen or a synthetic voice.
The clinical achievements in speech prosthetics are breathtaking, truly. But we must be precise about what is being decoded there.
Right.
The researchers are decoding overt, attempted speech. The patient is physically trying to move their tongue, lips, and jaw. The motor cortex is firing exactly as it would for regular speech, even if the muscles themselves are disconnected.
Okay, but how is that different from decoding my internal monologue? Because my inner voice doesn't always feel like I'm about to move my mouth. Sometimes my inner speech isn't even words. It's an image or feeling or just a vague abstraction.
The variability of inner experience is exactly why true mind reading is so far off. Inner speech does not reliably map to the motor cortex in the same way attempted speech does. So successfully decoding a prompted phrase like, I am thirsty from a willing patient in a lab, does not mean the technology can tap into a person's private stream of consciousness thoughts.
What happens when we take these interfaces into altered states? like sleep or anesthesia. If the brain is a predictive machine, what is it doing when we are unconscious?
Sleep is not the brain simply turning off. It is an active, dynamic architecture. Slow-wave sleep is critical for clearing metabolic waste, and REM sleep is deeply involved in that memory reconsolidation we discussed.
Right, the Wikipedia editing.
Exactly.
Mm.
And we can use EEG to track these stages. We can even identify lucid dreaming when a person realizes they're in a dream. Researchers have had lucid dreamers signal their awareness using prearranged patterns of eye movements,
Oh, wow.
which can be tracked while they're asleep.
That is wild. They are trapped in the dream, but sending Morse code out to the real world.
Yeah.
But does that mean we can record the dream?
No. We can track the physiological state, and machine learning might be able to classify if you are likely dreaming about a face versus a house based on visual cortex activity.
Uh-huh.
But again, tracking the category of a stimulus is not recording the subjective narrative of the dream.
Right.
The same applies to anesthesia or psychedelics. Anesthetics seem to disrupt how different networks integrate information. But there is no simple consciousness meter. You have to combine brain signals with the physical context of the patient. We have to avoid the mystical height when discussing altered states.
Okay, so if we can read these signals, even probabilistically, the natural human urge is to try and right them, to fix what's broken.
Right.
Let's talk about modifying the mind. Deep brain stimulation, or DBS, is already a reality, primarily for Parkinson's disease.
DBS involves surgically implanting electrodes deep into specific brain structures like the basal ganglia and delivering continuous electrical pulses from a pacemaker implanted in the chest.
Right, and for Parkinson's, the results can look miraculous. I've seen the videos where disabling tremors just vanish the moment the device is turned on.
Yes.
So we did find the off switch for Parkinson's.
It is tempting to view it that way,
Mm-hmm.
but DBS modulates entire networks. It doesn't just switch off a disease. Because you are pumping electricity into a tightly packed jungle ecosystem, that energy can spill over into adjacent circuits.
Oh, I see.
Patients with DBS for motor symptoms sometimes experience unexpected side effects, changes in mood, hypersexuality, or severe impulsivity. You are treating the tremor, but you might inadvertently alter the patient's decision-making architecture.
Which is why the field is moving toward closed-loop therapies, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the pacemaker just blasting electricity 24/7, it waits. It listens for a specific biomarker, like the neural pattern that precedes a seizure, and only fires the stimulation to disrupt it before it happens.
Responsive stimulation is a massive leap forward. It reduces the total amount of electricity delivered to the brain, which minimizes side effects and extends battery life.
Right.
But it relies heavily on the algorithm correctly identifying the biomarker. When you automate an intervention inside the human brain, you need incredibly safe default settings and continuous clinician oversight.
If we can do this for seizures or tremors, what about mental illness? Can we find the circuit for severe depression, implant a closed-loop device, and just zap the depression away?
The search for simple, universal biomarkers in psychiatry is incredibly difficult because of disease heterogeneity.
Heterogeneity meaning the disease looks completely different from person to person.
Right. Consider two people diagnosed with major depressive disorder. One might have insomnia, severe weight loss, and crippling anxiety. The other might sleep 14 hours a day, gain weight, and feel complete emotional numbness.
Wow, yeah.
The underlying circuit dysfunctions driving those two states are likely entirely different. There is no single depression circuit.
So one-size-fits-all implant just wouldn't work.
It wouldn't. Moreover, psychiatric distress is not just a biological hardware failure. It arises from the intersection of biology, psychology, and lived social context.
Right, the environment.
A neurotechnology cannot make trauma, discrimination, or grief disappear. If the medical field relies solely on circuit science and ignores the patient's environment, it fails the patient. Precision medicine means better matching of treatments to specific symptoms, not false certainty about someone's inner life based on a scan.
Let's follow that logic to its extreme. If we are learning to repair function, the immediate question is always, why stop at baseline?
Right, of course.
If we can fix a memory deficit in an Alzheimer's patient, why shouldn't humanity upgrade a healthy person to have a photographic memory? Why not technologically enhance focus so we can all work like geniuses?
Because of the biological budget we discussed at the very beginning, biological enhancement is rarely a free lunch. Let's say you use a future neurostimulator or a pharmaceutical to vastly increase your hyperfocus on a task.
Sounds great for studying.
It does. But biologically, locking the brain into a state of hyperfocus often decreases cognitive flexibility. You become so laser-focused that you lose the ability to adapt to new, unexpected information, or you become highly impulsive outside of that task.
And what about memory? You mentioned earlier that forgetting is actually a feature, not a bug.
Forgetting is essential for survival. If you remember every single specific detail of every dog you've ever seen, you struggle to form the abstract concept of dog.
Oh, that makes sense.
Forgetting allows us to generalize. And more importantly, forgetting allows us to emotionally adapt to trauma.
Right.
If a technology locked in your memory so they were excessively persistent and vivid, you could induce a state akin to PTSD. Treating memory as an unlimited computer hard drive fundamentally misunderstands what human memory is actually designed to do.
Let's talk about the ultimate enhancement fantasy, which is genetics. The classic sci-fi trope is editing embryos so everyone is born with an IQ of 160. Is there a genius gene we can just toggle on with CRISPR?
Absolutely not. First, we have to recognize that what intelligence tests measure is just a sampling of cognitive abilities under very specific defined conditions. Working memory, processing speed, spatial reasoning. No single number captures human competence.
Right.
But genetically, intelligence is a highly polygenic trait.
Meaning it's not controlled by one gene.
It involves thousands upon thousands of genetic variants, and each one has a microscopic context-dependent effect.
It's less like flipping a master light switch and more like trying to tune a million separate volume dials to get the perfect sound.
A beautiful way to put it. When you hear about a polygenic score for educational attainment or intelligence, that is a statistical probability derived from huge populations. It is not a deterministic blueprint for an individual mind.
Okay.
Editing an embryo for complex cognitive traits is scientifically fraught with nonlinear trade-offs, often called pleiotropy. If you turn up a dial hoping to increase working memory, you might inadvertently turn up the dial for crippling anxiety or an autoimmune disorder. You cannot outsmart millions of years of evolutionary balance with a single edit.
Okay, let's leave the messy biology behind for a second, because a lot of technology forecasts suggest we will eventually just bypass these biological limitations altogether. Let's look at the speculative frontier. Artificial intelligence, reverse engineering the brain, and uploading ourselves to the cloud. Let's start with AI. We are living in the era of large language models. When an AI writes a stunningly beautiful poem or argues with me about philosophy, it is incredibly hard not to feel like there is a ghost in the machine. Are these models proving that machines can think like us?
This brings us to misconception number 3. Artificial intelligence that successfully imitates human communication is not automatically conscious.
But they are called neural networks. Doesn't that mean they are built like our brains?
Similarity of terminology should never be mistaken for identity of mechanism. Artificial neural networks are mathematically inspired by the way biological neurons weight connections. But they lack biological development. They lack embodiment in a physical world, and they lack the staggering energy efficiency of a human brain.
Your brain runs on what? Roughly 20 watts of power, like a dim light bulb?
Exactly, 20 watts. Meanwhile, the data centers training these language models consume megawatts of power.
Yeah.
When a language model generates a fluent paragraph, it is not experiencing subjective awareness. It is performing highly complex statistical calculations to predict the next most likely token based on its training data.
But what if we don't just mimic the output? What if we perfectly map the entire biological brain? Scientists are working on the connectome, right? The complete wiring diagram of all the neurons. If we map all of it, haven't we reverse engineered the brain?
The connectome is a parts list. It's a foundational map, and achieving a complete human connectome will be a monumental scientific triumph. But having an inventory of the wiring does not explain the dynamic computation happening on that wiring.
I'm trying to picture this. It's like having a map of every single road and highway in a country.
Yes, the connectome is the road map, but that map doesn't tell you where the traffic jams are today.
Right.
It doesn't tell you why people are traveling or what the weather is doing to the road conditions. Understanding the road map omits the momentary strengths of the synapses, the chemical neuromodulators floating around in the fluid, and the continuous feedback loop from the physical body.
Wow, yeah.
Reverse engineering a brain requires understanding the causality of the system in motion, not just tracing the physical wires.
Which brings us to the ultimate sci-fi promise from Michio Kaku's forecasts. Uploading minds, beaming consciousness across space, or uploading your entire brain to a supercomputer so you can live forever in a digital utopia. Where does the established evidence actually stand on this?
We have to draw the hardest line of the entire deep dive right here. This is misconception number 5. Brain simulation, digital replicas, and preserved voice or behavior do not establish consciousness transfer or personal immortality.
Oof. So no living forever in the cloud. Let's break down exactly why.
First, on a purely practical level, current imaging is nowhere near a complete living person-level extraction.
No.
We don't even know which microscopic details, which proteins, which quantum effects are necessary to capture the self, let alone how to scan them without destroying the living tissue.
Right.
But let's pretend we solve the scanning problem. Let's pretend we build a perfect computational model of your brain. A simulation is still an abstraction.
Right, like a simulation of a hurricane on a supercomputer doesn't make the computer wet.
Precisely the point. The map is not the territory. Even if a digital system perfectly reproduced your memories, your personality quirks, and responded to questions exactly as you would, it would just be a copy that believes it is you.
That's eerie.
It is a clone. It is not a transfer of your subjective first-person self. The original you still sits in the chair, trapped in your biology.
So all these AI startups offering to let you talk to a deceased relative.
Digital preservation of your behaviors or a chatbot trained on a lifetime of your emails might be a wonderful, comforting way for your family to remember you. But calling it immortality or transferring consciousness is a fundamental category error.
What about avatars? Not uploading fully, but using an interface to control a robotic body remotely. Like telepresence for hazardous work or space exploration where my brain stays here, but I feel like I'm in a robot on Mars.
That is much closer to established science. We call it remote presence and sensor-motor control. The human brain is incredibly flexible with its body map. You can demonstrate this with a famous rubber hand illusion.
Oh, I've seen this, where a person's real hand is hidden.
Yes, and a rubber hand is stroked in sync with their real hand,
Mm.
and the brain actually adopts the rubber hand as its own. It feels genuine shock if the rubber hand is threatened.
So we can extend that illusion to a robotic avatar.
Yes. When the visual feedback, the timing, and your intention form a stable loop, the brain can create a profound illusion of body ownership over a machine.
Wow.
But again, your consciousness hasn't migrated into the robot. The practical limits of telepresence in space, for example, are governed by communication delays, literally the speed of light, not by sending your mind across the universe.
Okay, if we can't upload ourselves into the cloud, it means we are stuck with physical brains in a physical world. Which brings us to our final segment, the guardrails. Because if we are extracting data from physical brains, even probabilistically, the neuroethics and cybersecurity implications are massive. Let's talk about mental privacy.
Mental privacy is arguably the most urgent ethical issue we face with neural data. The immediate threat isn't a futuristic supercomputer perfectly reading your inner monologue. The immediate threat is that neural data can be used to make highly invasive inferences about your health, your fatigue levels, your emotional responses, and your behavioral features.
So it's a dual-use problem. A consumer headband designed to help you meditate and focus could be mandated by your employer to monitor your attention span at your desk.
Or to monitor if you react negatively to a political image on your screen.
Oh, wow.
If raw neural signals, derived features, and model outputs aren't protected with rigorous encryption and strict legal boundaries, they can be combined with your behavioral data, your commercial data, and your location to build a terrifyingly intimate profile of you.
I have to push back a little here, though. Are we spending too much time worrying about cybersecurity for mind-reading implants that the average person doesn't even have yet? It feels a bit like worrying about traffic laws on Mars.
We cannot wait until the technology is ubiquitous to build the defenses. The threat models are already real for clinical implants.
Right.
Think about unauthorized access, data theft, or malicious software updates.
Right.
If you have a closed-loop, deep brain stimulator managing your severe depression, what happens if a hacker manipulates the algorithm? The stakes are biological.
Or, honestly, something far more mundane but equally terrifying. What happens if the startup that manufactured your brain implant goes bankrupt?
Failure planning is a massive, immediate concern. Neural implants require constant maintenance, proprietary software updates, and hardware support.
Right, it's not a pacemaker from the 90s.
Exactly. If the parent company goes under or simply decides to stop supporting an older model, patients can be left with an abandoned piece of hardware physically implanted inside their skull that degrades, misfires, or ceases to function. Continuity planning is not just a business requirement, it is a clinical and ethical mandate.
Let's ground this in the modern reality. According to the research cutoff of August 2026, where do we actually stand with safety, regulation, and evidence? Have the regulators caught up?
We are seeing significant progress. There are massive collaborative brain mapping initiatives globally. Regulators, like the FDA, have established much clearer clinical pathways for BCI devices intended to restore motor or sensory capabilities.
Okay, that's good.
They are focusing heavily on rigorous risk management, long-term safety data, and study design. Furthermore, neuroethics is finally being integrated directly into the engineering phase of these devices, rather than just being an academic afterthought.
So with all this rigorous science, why do so many technological forecasts go wrong? Why do we always seem to think the sci-fi future is just 5 years away?
Three main traps continually skew our forecasts. First is linear extrapolation. A technology, like electrode density, improves rapidly for a few years, and forecasters assume the curve goes up forever.
Right.
They ignore the inevitable bottlenecks of biology, manufacturing, and regulation,
Getting a mouse to move a cursor in a sterile lab doesn't equal a safe consumer product.
which is the second trap, the massive gap between a lab demonstration and real-world deployment.
Oh, yeah.
A lab demo has highly motivated ideal participants, expert technicians standing by, and zero real-world noise. Real-world deployment adds fatigue, device wear and tear, and the chaos of daily life. The last mile is always the hardest part of the journey.
And the third trap.
And the third trap is survivorship bias.
We only hear about the wins.
Exactly. We see the highly publicized successes, the viral videos of a patient walking again, and we ignore the failed replications, the dropped clinical trials, and the abandoned products. It makes the field look artificially mature and deterministic.
Okay, let's synthesize everything we've covered today. We started with our central question. Where does established scientific evidence end, and where do technological forecasts and speculation begin? Based strictly on the clinical evidence as of August 2026, what is the verdict?
The verdict is that science can increasingly measure, decode, and influence limited, specific components of mental function. We can restore overt speech to the paralyzed under controlled conditions, and we can modulate neural circuits to treat severe disorders like Parkinson's.
Right.
But established capabilities are far, far narrower than unrestricted mind reading, artificial consciousness, uploading the human mind, or achieving digital immortality. The frontier is undeniably real and transformative, but it must be paired with patient consent, equity, and hard evidence, not speculative hype.
It is an incredible frontier, but the biological reality of that jungle ecosystem inside our skulls keeps us grounded. Before we wrap up, we want to identify this production as an independent COSMORA HQ book overview in audio podcast format. It is not an audiobook, complete narration, adaptation, abridgment, reconstruction, authorized production, or substitute for the original book. We highly encourage you to legally access Michio Kaku's original work. Now, we want to leave you with a question to chew on as you go about your day. Think carefully about this. If technology could safely repair or enhance one function of the human mind, which function should humanity prioritize, and what ethical limit should never be crossed?